Louis is 59 years old, living and having been born in September 21st, 1944. I am Rita Shapiro. To begin with, Louis, will you please state your name for the record and the war in which you served?
Louis D. Featherman. I served in the Vietnam War.
Okay. Were you drafted or did you enlist?
I was drafted.
Okay. And you were living where at the time?
I was living at home. I had graduated college. And
Where'd you go to school?
I graduated from what at the time was Claremont Men's College, which is now known as Claremont McKenna College in Claremont, California.
Okay. And did you enlist? Were you drafted shortly after you got out of school?
I was drafted I'm told to report at the end of February, the 1st of March of the year after I graduated. I graduated in 1969.
So you went
or 68, I'm sorry.
68. So you went
in 69.
In 69.
Yeah.
Okay.
Early part of March.
Did you have a say in which branch of the service you were going to go into?
No, although interestingly enough, at the induction center in Syracuse, they actually were drafting people for Marines, and they just randomly selected a couple of people for the Marines, which I'm glad I didn't get selected for.
Mm-hmm. So what branch did you go into?
I was drafted into the Army.
Into the Army.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And do you remember, where were you, did you do your basic training?
We were bused from Syracuse, which was New York, which was the induction center, to Fort Dix, New Jersey. And I did 8 weeks of basic training there, and I did 8 weeks of advanced infantry training there.
Both at Fort Dix.
Yeah.
What was it like?
Fort Dix?
Yeah, no, I mean your training. The people your officers who were teaching you, the men with whom you were serving.
You'll have to remember the time, because it was a very volatile social situation. The people that were doing the training were actually the NCOs were all either regular Army or they were draftees who had returned from Vietnam that were doing some of the advanced infantry training. The makeup of the training companies, basic and in the advanced infantry training, were a fairly good cross-section of American society at the time, although there seemed to be a disproportionate number of non-college educated non-whites in the training units at that time. And there was a considerable amount of racial tension, because you have to remember that this was in an era of extreme societal unrest, and where black power had become a very significant political arena at the time.
How was this manifested?
How was it manifested? There was a lot of tension amongst the troops. There was, and it was, it was bad enough having to deal with the training aspects of being in the Army, the racial tensions that went on in the barracks, in terms of people fighting, and people were territorial about who they wanted to be with, and all of this. It added to the tension and added to the stress of training.
What was the role of your instructors with all of this?
I think they really, I don't really remember that much about the training NCOs, other than the fact that they were, I would say, pretty cynical about what was going on, especially the enlisted, or the draftees.
Were they white or black, that most of the
We
training?
had both.
Mhm.
And the people that did the training did a good job, but and they were, for the most part, were pretty straightforward. But there was always this underlying understanding that we were going to Vietnam. We had no idea what we were getting ourselves into, and a lot of us were going to get killed or wounded.
I mean, that was made known immediately.
Yeah, they said, pay attention because this might save your life, or pay attention, this might save you from, really getting messed up.
Mm.
But for the most part, people didn't pay attention. So.
And after all of this training, then, where were you sent?
I was sent to Vietnam. Actually, I was given
Immediately?
I was given I think a 2-week or 30-day leave,
Mhm.
and then we went out through Fort Lewis. Yeah, we went out through Fort Lewis, Washington, which was.
Was it as a group? I mean, the same group with whom you trained?
No. Everything, by this time in the war, the original deployments to Vietnam were in units. I was, at the time that I was in the service, it was all strictly replacements. So there was no unit integrity of troops that were being sent over to Vietnam. And as a matter of fact, when I went to Fort Lewis, we flew over, and then we landed at Ranh Bay without, it was just a general assignment. And then when we got there, they were assigning people to specific units or divisions according to whatever the needs were of the divisions at the time. So we got in country, we didn't know where we were going until they told us where we were going. And I was sent to the Americal division, which was headquartered in Chu Lai, which was about, midway up the coast of Vietnam. And at the time that I got to Chu Lai, I was sent to a replacement camp and was given a couple of days of in-country training where you were acclimated to the climate, and they acclimated to some of the local tactics that were being used at the time. And then I was put on a helicopter, and I was sent out into the bush and to meet the people that I was going to spend time with.
You were sent alone, or were there anybody else with you?
Well, there were just other replacements.
Other replacements sent with you?
Yeah, and we just jumped off the helicopter. I don't specifically remember who was there at the time, but when I jumped off the helicopter, I was greeted by, I don't even remember, but, and then I was assigned to a platoon in this Infantry Company. And when I went to the platoon, I was then assigned to a squad, which was about 8 or 10 men.
What was the physical structure and the physical, the land, the setting where you were?
The area in which I was assigned in Vietnam, Chu Lai, was a lot of rice paddies and jungle, mountainous jungle, triple canopy jungle. But most of the patrolling that we did was in areas that were like with rice paddies and tropical forested areas. And we operated. Our method of operation was to during the day we would be in an exposed area in what they would call a day logger, and we would just stay there and rest and sleep and relax. And then our main mission was to go out at night in squad-sized ambushes to predetermined targets or predetermined areas that were determined by the battalion intelligence arm, the S3 arm of the battalion. And we were deployed all over this particular area, and our mission was to deny the Viet Cong access to the villages near Chu Lai, where they would come in to be either to eat or resupply, or to do whatever they did in the villages. We didn't really have there wasn't a lot of mission statement going on. This was just that you go here and you do this, and we weren't in on the big picture. So.
And what was your feeling when you were doing all this?
Again, you have to understand, I was a college-educated draftee who had been in school and in society at a time where the American public were becoming very disillusioned with the war, and the anti-war movement had already started, and there was a lot of anti-war sentiment, and there was a lot of bad attitude. When I say bad attitude, I mean it was just a matter of the political implications of what we were doing. Be damned, our main mission was to survive the year that we had to spend there. Oh, incidentally, that was the other thing. When the assignment for the replacement troops was 1 year.
And did you stay in for a year?
I was there for a year.
No longer?
No. There was an option at the end. It was called an early out if you stayed an additional X number of days, so that your remaining service was less than 6 months, I think it was. Then when you came back to the United States, you'd be discharged you'd out process when you return. Not too many people opted to do that, because most people wanted to get out of there at the absolute instant that they could get out of there. So getting back to the attitude, there were a lot of people out in the field who were opposed to the war, or they were not regular Army. At the time that I was there, our platoon was I would say 99% non-regular Army, meaning they were what they call lifers. Well, I mean, they might have been enlistees, but they were short-term enlistees. There weren't any. The whole command infrastructure, the NCO infrastructure, and the officer infrastructure, by the time I got there, was not what had originally gone over there, which were all volunteer units, and that had unit cohesiveness. There was no unit cohesiveness. There was really nothing. It was just basically people figuring out how to survive out there, and your abilities to survive really had a lot to do with how long the people that were in charge of your units had been out there, and how well versed they were in, understanding the environment that they were in. So,
in other words, you depended upon them a great deal for your survival.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But I think that's always. Well, I don't know. Because the skills that I came over with were very rudimentary, and I had been an outdoors person per se when I had been growing up, so I wasn't used to living outdoors. I wasn't used to, being in the woods. I didn't have any.
You mean you were an indoor person, not an outdoor?
Well, it's not so much that. It's just that there was a certain type of people that grew up in rural America that spent their days and time in the woods, hunting, fishing, tracking, whatever. And I didn't have those skills, and most people didn't. So that's the type of environment we were in. At night we at dusk, we'd figure out where we were going to go, and it was usually, within 3 to 5 kilometers of where we had been during the day. And we would get there, and then we would form into an ambush with putting out claymore mines in areas that we thought that the VC were going to come through, and we'd set up in a line, for an ambush, and we'd lay out there all night and we were supposed to be at 50% alert, but we always, the way it worked was that one person at a time would be pulling guard, and we would be sleeping. And since we didn't have officers for the most part that were on these ambushes, and since we didn't, the NCOs that were out there were not, regular Army. We basically did what we wanted when we were out there, and our number one rule was survival. So rather than putting ourselves at risk as a small unit out there, we would very often put ourselves in a position of maximum defensive position and would not try to engage the enemy. We would try to, and I think the enemy, the Viet Cong, knew this, and they had a pretty good handle on where we were going to be, and being typical GIs with little training. We left tracks, we made noise, and we really, they were very much able to avoid us whenever they wanted.
Did you ever have any contact with them?
We did, but it was at their, they initiated it. It wasn't our initiating it. And, the times that we were not pleasant. We took casualties, and it was a bad situation.
Is it difficult for you to talk about this, Lloyd?
Honestly, Rita, I can look at it very clinically at this point in time. Although, interestingly enough, there are certain things that will evoke emotion. I'm thinking about something that happened this summer that was interesting. My wife, Joan, and I attended a Crosby, Stills and Nash concert, and they were a group that was popular then and they're popular now. And one of the songs that they sang was a song called "Southern Cross," and that song had a lot of meaning because the Southern Cross was the unit patch for the Americal division. So when I was listening,
the unit what?
It was the unit designation or the unit patch for the Americal division, and listening to that song was very, it was very emotional. It flashed back a lot of different things. I've had other moments. One that I can recall very vividly was a couple of years ago. I was in Washington, D.C. with now my son. One of my sons lives about maybe a half a mile from the Vietnam Memorial, and we were visiting him. This was a couple of years ago, and we went down to the memorial. My wife and my son and my daughter and myself, and we walked through, or we started to walk through. My daughter had actually, she had a friend that had asked her to get a rubbing of a person's name off of the wall. It was a friend of hers, uncle or something, who had been killed in Vietnam. And so we were walking along, looking at the wall and everything, and I saw all these people that were walking by. It was in the summertime, and it was, there was a fairly substantial number of people. And I looked at all of these people, walking by and not stopping and just kind of glancing over, and I had a complete emotional meltdown, I think is probably the word that it was probably, you know, it was a reaction, I think, that anybody who served there that knew people who were killed in Vietnam or wounded or whatever, probably would have experienced if they had been at the wall. But because I looked at the wall and I looked at all of these people, these names, and I realized that they all represented, each and every one of them represented a life unfulfilled. And, you know, it was just completely, I think it really hit me very hard at that point. And, you know, my kids and my wife understood that, and they, you know, it was a very emotional, you know, experience. And the other thing is that after I came home, it took a long time to...
I was going to ask you how long you think it took for you.
It took me until, I think the defining moment was when my first kid was born, when my first child was born. And until that time I was really, you know, I thought about it a lot. I read a lot of stories and articles and books, fiction, non-fiction, whatever, about, you know, the Vietnam experience. And, you know, it was something that was emotionally kept alive within me for a long time. And then, as I said, when my first child was born, I think I was, in a sense, reborn in a way myself. Because then you realize that, you know, there's somebody else there that you have to, and this is no disrespect to my wife, but it's at that point you realize you have to think of other people. You know, that was the turning point. And now, you know, I will occasionally think about it. It's, like I said, of something like, you know, hearing a song or, you know, seeing something on TV or something will bring back the emotions and, you know, evoke, you know, I'll think about things. And yeah, that's, but I think, you know, I hopefully was able to survive it. I know a lot of people have not emotionally survived it. My situation, what I went through there was, it was bearable. I mean, the incidents of violent, you know, combat were few and far between. And there were other things that happened that were very distressing that I wasn't directly involved in. That when I was in the field for about 7.5 months as a foot soldier, and after a month or two, I started carrying a radio, so I was involved in, you know, that was, being a radio man was a fairly important job. And when I got out of the field, I was assigned to a public information office at the brigade level, and what our job was to go out and interview people and write human interest stories for Army Times and Army publications, and take pictures and things like that. And so I was able to, I saw, you know, interviewed some people and did some interesting things with that.
That's wonderful. Did the things that you read depict the situation as it was? Was it truthful? Was it to the letter? Was it...
Well, some of the things, yeah. The experience for the foot soldier out in the field, the infantry part of it, basically is that you lived outside and you marched around, and you were at risk all the time, but especially at night. And we went on operations. I remember a couple operations we went on where we would take our whole company or whole battalion, and they would land a bunch of helicopters and get on the helicopters, and we'd go and they'd take us up into the mountains where they thought there were base camps and stuff, and drop us off, and then you'd be in this triple canopy jungle, which was basically impenetrable without a machete, and you'd be hacking through jungle for hours at a time, and not move very far, making a lot of noise. So if there were any troops around, any VC or NBA or whatever were around there, they would have been long gone by the time you got anywhere near them. I think that like I said, by the time we got there, or by the time I got there, the tactics on both sides were pretty well established, and it was at a time where the war was quote unquote winding down, and I think our mission was basically to keep pressure on, to let these people know that we were still there, and while they tried to straighten out the political mess that went along with it. And the political mess, I think, contributed considerably to what we had to deal with, because we were particularly in and near populated areas, we were in a very strict, we had strict constraints. There were no fire zones, and there were areas where we had to get permission from, like, governmental people before we could fire weapons, and I mean, it was a nightmare. That part of it was just.
Well, how could you get permission? Did you have to get permission
They
beforehand?
actually had to. If we were fired upon in some areas, you would have to, unless you were in imminent danger, you had to call and get a clearance to return fire. Obviously, if you're being attacked, but if somebody, a sniper fired at you or something like that, you had to get permission before you could.
Before you could return fire?
Before you could call for, artillery or, return any kind of fire. I mean, it's outrageous. And the other thing is that during the day, we were surrounded by, in most instances, in the area that we operated, we were surrounded by civilians. And during the day, the kids and these that were entrepreneurs would come out with iced Coke that you could buy. And, they had all kinds of services. They had women they brought out. They had, it was like a gypsy band. It was like you were in the army and you were out in the field, but you were still dealing with the public. And these people, they kept pretty close tabs on our.
Did you consider them your enemies?
We knew that they were the main source of intelligence for the VC. But by the same token, it was quid pro quo. We were receiving benefits in the field that we didn't have. They had ice, they had soda. That was, they had stuff like that. It was like you tried to coexist. And when things got out of balance, and I remember an instance where a couple of guys in our platoon, and I'm not sure what they were thinking, but they cheated a couple of the prostitutes that came out, didn't pay them. And that night when we went on patrol, we got ambushed. So
You really did know. You knew that there.
Well, the classic story that I remember, the classic incident that I remember from this whole time, is that at Christmas time there was a ceasefire, quote unquote, and that was supposed to be like a 24-hour period where it had been agreed upon that there wouldn't be any conflict between either side. We were out in the field And we had our company, we normally didn't get together as a company. We would stay in platoon during the day, but the company all came together on this one area. It was like, the area was called Pine Island. And what it was probably an old, at one time there was probably a farm or some type of structure. And it was in the middle of a rice paddy area. And you could see in 360 degrees around this area. And it wasn't that big, it was maybe 50 yards across, maybe 75 yards across. But it was considered to be a safe area because you could guard all approaches, you could see everything from all sides. And there were some major trails that passed through there. So our company set up there for, I think, Christmas or New Year's, or no, actually it was New Year's, I remember. And so the next morning we woke up and there was a big banner across one of the trails wishing us a Happy New Year with our unit designation. There's Delta Company, 1st to the 6th, Happy New Year. They had snuck in there at night and put a sign up. And the intelligence people...
Amazing.
The intelligence people came out, they took pictures, they were very distressed about it.
But they let you sleep through the night.
Well, we had people on, there were people posted on guard,
but they didn't see them.
No, they didn't see here. These people were masters, they could do anything they wanted. And they pretty much did anything they wanted. You can chalk it up to, our training wasn't adequate. We weren't properly, I don't think we were properly equipped. I don't think we were properly, the unit size, we were, the units I think were too large. And the way we did things were not, they weren't effective. We weren't, searching and destroying, or, seeking out the enemy. Our, the catchword at the time was search and destroy, and our catchword was search and avoid. And just an interesting sidebar. When I left the field, our battalion switched areas of operation with another battalion. And we went into an unfamiliar area. And I had left the field the day that we did this. And the area that we switched into was the area around My Lai and that area. This was after everything had happened, but it was the most heavily mined and booby-trapped area in Vietnam.
Done by the American soldiers?
No.
The traps and everything were done by the Vietnamese?
Yeah, they were done by the VC. And after that, my old battalion and my old company started to take horrendous casualties. And matter of fact, the reason for the switch is that our battalion commander was the one that I started out with left, and our new battalion commander was a much more aggressive soldier by the name of Norman Schwarzkopf. He was my battalion commander.
Really?
Yeah. And as a matter of fact, in his biography, there's a section about our unit, which he called the most poorly trained unit that he'd ever been involved in. And it wasn't our fault. I mean, it was just the way things were done. And he, as a matter of fact, he was wounded. He went in to try to rescue some people who had been gotten into a minefield, and he went in. He was brave. I mean, there was no questioning his integrity and his bravery or anything like that. and he went in to try to rescue some people who were trapped in a minefield, and he got hurt himself.
Mm.
And I avoided that. I mean, I missed that.
Fortunately.
And yeah, I was very fortunate. I think part of what I experienced after I left there, I guess you would call it survivor's guilt in a sense. You know, I had missed something. You know,
You didn't have
pretty
any
awful.
sense of responsibility or anything for what had happened? Not responsibility, what's the word I want? Any angst or anything for?
No, yeah, as I said, I think part of what I experienced after I left Vietnam is what they call survivor's guilt, in the sense that I was taken out of a situation, or I survived a situation that, for a variety of circumstances, I was able to survive. And that was rule number one for people who were over there, was to survive, as far as, you know, the average soldier was concerned.
Mm.
And, you know, if you could help your buddies out, that, you know, to survive, that was what you did.
Mm.
And I think it was very different than the other wars.
In other words, it wasn't really a cohesive unit.
No, that was, it became a very big problem after, you know, when they started sending in replacements, because the replacements were coming in as people were being wounded, and then as their term of service was up, they were being replaced. So you had people coming in as replacements at all times, and nobody was there for that long. And it wasn't like the Second World War, where people were together for years, you know, and they had unit cohesiveness, and they had leadership, and they had, you know, a sense, you know, a clear political mandate. They knew why they were there and what they were doing, and, you know, so that when people did make a sacrifice, it was for something. And whereas with Vietnam, I think that at the time there was a great deal of anxiety, you know, anger and despair, because all of these people all these lives are being wasted. And the other thing about it was that in the field at the time that I was there, we never saw any officers above company level officer in the field. Company commander was the highest rank. The battalion command, you know, the lieutenant colonels and the colonels and whatever, were in a fire base, in a bunker with maps, and they were directing the war.
But protected.
But, you know, from maps, and they were making decisions based on probably faulty intelligence or non-intelligence. They were moving people around out there. Very infrequently would they actually come out. I remember all the time that I was going on these ambushes, we had one visit out there by a major who spent the night on an ambush to see what was going on.
And nobody even of lesser rank was out there?
Well, there were captains and lieutenants, but when you in World War II in Korea, when you were in the field, your entire unit moved. I mean, granted, the office, you know, the staff level officers were moving, but behind the lines a little bit. But at least they were involved. In, you know, these people were on a fire base, being protected by other people, and they were actually in air-conditioned operation centers, and it went up the chain of command. The brigade command was the same way. The division command was the same way. The people who had the most experience and the most understanding of how to wage war were not involved in waging the war.
Well, were there non-coms, or were you all just, or were you, I mean, were there non-coms supposedly directing you and telling you what to do, or did you just individually do what?
Oh, they had, every day we received orders to where we were supposed to do our ambushes. And,
But who was directing it? Were there non-coms there? Did you have any
NCOs?
sergeants?
Oh, yeah.
Had sergeants
There were
and
NCOs.
corporals and,
Yeah, I mean, but as far as anything above a company level officer in the field, no way. I mean, they weren't in the field. And
did you feel a protective, you were protecting your people, the other people in the unit, or were you out for yourself?
well, it was both. But yeah, you had to protect other people, and I mean, you pulled guard with these people. You slept with them, you ate with them. You know, you were with them 24 hours a day, and yes, you did. I mean, you were there for them, but you weren't fighting this war for anybody other than those people, and you weren't fighting it for anybody other than, you know, for your own survival. And matter of fact, a lot of what we did as the radio operators were very important, because we received all of the coordinates for the ambush sites, and we received you know, the instructions of what we were supposed to do, which then we relayed to the, you know, to the NCOs. And basically what happened, and this happened all the time, is that we would be given a specific ambush site, and the whoever was, you know, a squad leader or whatever, would look at it, and they'd see it was ridiculous because it was maybe 5 or 6 kilometers from where we were, and it was going through an exposed area or going through a high-risk area where, you know, there was potential. So what we would do is that we would go somewhere else where we were safe, but we would tell them that we were where they thought we were supposed to be. And that could get to be kind of dangerous, because we also had artillery registration, where they would give you registration points so that if you were attacked during the night, you could call in artillery on these references. And they did some H&I fire, which was harassment and interdiction, where they would randomly fire artillery at night. And so you had to make sure that you were fairly close to where you were supposed to be.
Or let them know.
Well, we never let them know, because
you were in the wrong place.
Yeah, you know, we weren't where we were supposed to be, but we were near there. We were in an area nearby that we considered to be safe. And whereas some of the places that they were putting us, they were just looking at a map. We were there. And, you know, we would say, well, that's ridiculous. You're exposed on 3 sides, and you have no way of, you know, effectively defending yourself where you were. Or you know, they would put you on you know, at a trail intersection where you couldn't, you know, you could be overwhelmed if more than 4 or 5 people came down the trail. So, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that went on. And it was constant. And, you know, being a radio operator, you had to really be able to play this game. And, you know, and we all knew it. I mean, everybody knew what was, you know, the people out in the field knew what was going on, and the people in the battalion and brigade command centers didn't know what was going on. But I mean, it worked out. I mean, we were able to minimize our casualties.
I was going to say, were your casualties heavy?
No, not until, like I said, when I got out of it. Then they started to take horrendous casualties. They were horrendous injuries too. I mean, we were talking about, and the reason I knew that they were horrendous injuries is that in the brigade information office, they had the casualty reports, And part of the job was to radio these casualty reports up through the chain of command. And the way everything works in the Army is that the casualty report came to the unit, and the unit reported it to the next level, which was the brigade level. Then the brigade level would report it to the division. The division would then report it to you know, and then the Army would report it back to the family. But the way that the casualty reports, actually there was a casualty office that was right next to ours. That's what it was. And there was a casualty officer, and that's what his job was to write up these casualty reports. And what they would do, they were coded according to, you know, severity of injury, but they weren't. I mean, they used these random words that represented different levels, or you know, of injury. And I'd go in there, and I'd see somebody's name I know, and I'd look and I'd see, and it was TRANE, which was like, you know, multiple amputation or something like that from a mine or a booby trap. And it was just awful. I mean, it was just day after day after day. There were people.
You saw casualties daily.
These reports, and there were people that I knew, and you know, and there were a few instances where I went over to when I had time off, which was, we worked, you know, obviously every day, but occasionally I would have some time off, and I'd go over to one of the hospitals to see these guys in the hospital that I had spent months with, and you'd see them, and you know, it was just awful.
Well, now straighten me out about something. When you became a radio operator, whatever you called it,
yeah,
you were not attached to the same unit.
Oh yeah.
You were still attached to that.
Yeah, each squad had a radio.
Okay.
Okay. The squad was the smallest operational unit in a regular infantry company at that point in time. So there was one radio per squad, you know, and I was in the field, and I did, you know, I was attached to the unit. I mean, there were times when I wouldn't carry the radio. I'd become a rifleman again, or you know, and if we got shot at, I was a rifleman anyway. So, yeah. But more importantly, it was communicating and letting people know where we were and what we were doing, and you know, calling in situation reports, you know, at different times.
But then you were sent away from that arena. If you were able to go and see the men who were in the hospitals, what were you doing at that point?
Okay, at that point, I had been, I had gone from the infantry company. I had been reassigned to a brigade headquarters in the information office. I got a call in the field one day. You know, you come on in. And again, it was one of these things where I had been in, you know, a few weeks before, or a week before maybe, and I had seen my company commander, or no, actually it was a lieutenant that I was friendly with. And I said, if you hear of anything back here, you know, that's open, let me know, or you know, put my name in. And a week later, I got this call. And it was going from living, you know, in the mud and in the rice paddy to being in a barracks with, you know, with a cot, and you know, eating in a dining hall and getting up and going to work every day. And
it was like an office job.
Well, not exactly, because we were on a fire base and we got mortared, and we had to pull, occasionally had to pull guard duty. It had like a series of, I can't even remember what they called it, but it was like a tower, you know, there was a set of towers, and you'd get like tower duty, and you'd have to go out on the picket line.
Then how long were you actually out in the field?
7.5 months.
7.5 months. What did you do about eating? How did you get your food? How did you get any of the amenities? Or didn't you
Well,
have
there
them?
weren't any.
There weren't any.
They brought sea rations out in by helicopter. They bring out boxes.
Daily?
Usually, yeah, they try to get a helicopter out at least once a day, and sometimes twice a day if things were quiet and the weather was good and the helicopters were flying. And so you've got stuff that you got food and you got fed every day. And if the weather were bad and they couldn't fly, you could go hungry for a day or so. I mean,
You just didn't eat.
well, if you ran out of food, you did.
Mm-hmm.
And the food was like sea rations. You open them up. It was like a cardboard box. It had like a meal, a little meal tin, and there was like usually a tin of fruit, and there was some cookies or cake or whatever. And there were some meals that were edible, and there were some that were inedible. And what we did, the only fair way to do it is that they would turn the boxes upside down, and then you pick randomly so that you didn't.
So they weren't all the same.
No, no. And then you'd trade off with people, and some people liked certain things, and other people didn't like certain things. And there was one meal that not only
We're still going.
would we not eat ham and lima beans, but even the Vietnamese who would eat anything wouldn't eat that. And but there were some meals that were edible. I mean, you had to eat.
Sure.
And I'd say about once every 2 months that we would get called into a rear area. Are you ready to change?
So there's 8 more minutes, I'll come back.
Okay. For something called a stand down, and you'd go into a rear area and you'd be in a barracks, and they would set up a big barbecue, and you'd have steak, and you'd eat and get drunk for 2 or 3 days, and get clean clothes, and
I
get
was
to
going
take
to
a
ask,
shower.
what about your clothes, and what about shaving, and all that sort of thing?
Well, you got water out of the rice paddy and put
In
it in
your
your
canteen, your helmet was...
helmet, and use that for shaving. And as far as bathing was concerned, in the field, there were some streams and rivers, and occasionally, every day or a couple days, we'd try to set up during the day near one of these areas. You'd go down and bathe in the river. But for the most part, there was no,
Couldn't get to them.
no. And, mail from home was a big deal. That was something that was, they tried to get the mail out every day.
And they did.
And if they could. And, getting letters from home was a big
Very
deal.
important.
It was very important. And writing letters, this was in an era where we didn't have email, we didn't have, you couldn't pick up a cell phone or any kind of phone and call. And
So everybody wrote
everybody
letters in
wrote
those
it.
days.
Exactly. So, matter of fact, I have my mother saved all of my letters, all the letters that I sent home, and they're at home. I described a lot of it.
How open were you about this when you were writing home? Did you tell them?
Oh, I told
Everything.
them about the conditions that we were living in, and the feeling of how screwed up the war was, and how misdirected everything was. But as far as talking about people getting killed or wounded or anything, no, there was no point to that. And we didn't really take that many casualties. We suffered a lot of, there was a lot of, marching and a lot of, moving, carrying a lot of equipment across country and stuff like that. It was very demanding. And, people got hurt.
Were you ever wounded?
No. The only thing that ever happened to me is that we were on an operation in the mountains one time, and I jumped off a helicopter, and the helicopter was had not landed; it was hovering, and it was the ground wasn't level, and I jumped and I turned my ankle, so I was on a sprained ankle for hiking around for about 3 or 4 days, and finally I couldn't. I had to get medevaced out of there. And I was, I had trench foot, but everybody did. Crazy things happened over there.
Do you want to listen?
Huh?
You want to go any further?
Yeah, I mean, some of the things that happened were really strange. I mean, I remember we were on an operation during a monsoon season, and it rained constantly. We were out in the rain, and we were just drenched, and you couldn't get dry. There was no way to get dry. It was just, and I don't know what happened, but I didn't drink any water for like 2 days because I was absorbing water through my skin. It was unbelievable. I had a full canteen that I never used. And just crazy. I think I got trench foot, and I think I was absorbing water through my feet. And what other things that were crazy that happened over there? On one of these operations, we were walking down a stream bed and saw tiger tracks. I mean, that used to be, the mountainous areas of Vietnam used to be prime tiger country. Another time, we were on a patrol during the day. We had just gone, we were just at the edge of a rice paddy, and I looked up and I saw a bear. And I couldn't believe it, and I yelled. I said, "Look, there's a bear!" And he took off up a hill, and a couple of guys went after him, just to track him. They were country boys; they like to track animals, and they went up about 100 feet up the stream bed, and they found a lair. They said it was just where this bear had been living, and I couldn't. It was hard for me to believe that there was, that a bear lived in, in that climate. And I never really believed that I had seen a bear until I came back to the United States, and I was visiting family in San Diego. And we went to I remember going to the San Diego Zoo, and we were going around, and we were in the bear section, and they had a pen where they had something called the Southeast Asian sun bear, and I looked, and that was the bear.
There was your friend.
And I said to the we were on one of these trolleys that with the person that's giving a commentator. Or a commentation, whatever. Yeah. And I told her the story, and I said it was just really bizarre. I said this bear took off, and he disappeared. And she said, you were very fortunate. And I said, why is that? And she said that particular species of bear is very aggressive and very, very. It's one of the most aggressive members of the bear family. And I looked at her, I said, he was fortunate that he didn't come the other way, because he had 12 guys with automatic weapons that were standing there. So.
He wouldn't have gotten too far.
No, but it was...
in other words, what you're saying is you had your moments.
There were moments, yeah. And I worked at the brigade level. The brigade commander at the time was another very famous soldier from another era, Joseph Clemens, who was a Pork Chop Hill. Gregory Peck, I think, played him.
Yeah. Pork Chop Hill was well known in the Korean War.
He was a very, very much an old school old army, brown shoe army, I guess they would call him. He was actually an enlisted man who had won the Medal of Honor, and then he had been given a commission.
I've forgotten that.
And he had
Field commission?
yeah, and at the time that he was a full colonel, in command of one of the it was the 198th Brigade, the Americal division.
Well, what was your most memorable memory? What was something that was really stood out in your mind? Was there anything besides what you have told us here?
Memorable in what?
Just something that has stayed in your memory, or was perhaps even a happy experience, or something that was, I mean, it could be either good or bad.
Well, I remember the high point of my tour was we got on what they call the Freedom Bird.
The Freedom what?
The Freedom Bird. That was the jet,
The jet.
to take us home.
Uh,
And we got on the runway, and this jet was all filled with guys that were going home. And went down the runway. It was very quiet. The minute that jet left the ground, there was this cheer that went on for about 5 minutes. People just screaming and clapping and tears running down people's faces, and it was probably the happiest moment of our lives up until that point in time, because that was it. We had survived.
You were going home.
Yeah. Well, I remember crazy, memorable things. I remember going to China Beach for the Jewish holidays.
Oh.
We were given an option of being able to take in-country leave to attend Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur service. Yeah, and I remember that going to China Beach, which was a beautiful, it had been a resort, I think, at some point.
Wasn't this well known in one of the television shows that came out after?
But there was a beautiful beach there, and I remember going out and swimming and body surfing and everything. It was really pleasant. But the most interesting part, or the most memorable part for me, is that I ran into people who I had gone to summer camp with when I was a kid.
Never.
Yeah. That I had gone
How
to
could
camp.
you recognize each other at that?
I'll tell you a story afterward about recognizing, but I don't know, I just, you see these people, and I think people had name tags. Yeah, we had our name tags also. So that helped quite a bit. But yeah, I ran into people I'd gone to camp with. That was funny.
Yeah, but did you have a good experience? Did you go to services?
Yeah, we went to services. Actually, I only went for Rosh Hashanah. When I got back, there was a certain amount of, anger toward me for having left for a couple of days. So I didn't go for Yom Kippur. I decided I wasn't going to push it.
It wasn't worth it, no?
No, it wasn't worth to push it. And but it was nice to, it was meaningful.
Well, that was a good respite for you.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was.
Even if it was just for a couple of days.
Yeah. And let's see, other memorable things. Just.
All right, then conversely, what were the worst things?
Well.
Or was it all?
I was just thinking about that. I think the worst thing that happened that I can remember, and the thing I think that made me the saddest, in our squad, it was in our squad. there were a couple of guys that were very good friends. There were 4 of them. And they used to, they would, they'd set up together, meaning they would put up shelters together during the day and hang out together. They were like very, they were really friendly. And this actually happened the day I left the field. I wasn't there. It was terrible. One of the guys was cleaning his weapon, and when he got done cleaning it, he pulled the trigger because that's what you do normally, and he hadn't unloaded it, and he shot one of his best friends in the head and killed him. It was an accident. And that was just, terrible. I mean, I heard about that, and that was just awful. And they actually, they charged him. I can't remember what they charged him with. I can't remember whether it was an Article 15 or whether it was going to go beyond that or not. But
What was Article 15?
it was
Manslaughter?
non-judicial punishment.
What?
Non-judicial punishment.
Oh,
It was for, there was probably for disobeying a regulation about, having your
Loaded,
weapon loaded in a day, whatever. I mean, there were certain things that you were supposed to not do. And I remember the kid that did it was he was of Japanese descent. He was from Hawaii. And about 2 months later, I went into the casualty office, and I saw that he had been killed. And I looked to see because they would tell, cause of death and everything. And he had jumped out a hotel window in Tokyo.
In other words, he committed suicide.
Yeah. And part of it, I think, was cultural, because he had dishonored himself. He was from a very traditional
Japanese family.
Yeah. And that has stuck with me all these years. That 2 lives have been wasted.
Needlessly.
Yeah, it was terrible. I mean, things like that, you just
you don't forget.
no. You don't.
Do you think your experience has changed you? Did it change you in any way?
I think for a long time after the war, or after my experience over there, it was very easy to be, angry at this. I think I've always been somewhat cynical about, authority and about the government, but that really, having been there and seen what went on and saw how the decision making was done, the difference between what the Army was saying and what was really happening, the reality. You tend to become cynical. I was angry for a long time, but get over that.
Were there any positives?
Yeah, I think that upon reflection, pride in having served country, and as you get further and further away, you realize that it was part of being a citizen. It was part of I make a point of trying to vote every time there's an election, because I realize that that's something that was people sacrificed their lives so that everyday citizens could vote.
Okay.
And, I mean, it's, you become aware that you're part of something. You're part of something a lot larger than yourself. And, but there's this hefty dose of skepticism, and if you're going to do something like that, you better be damn sure that you know what you're doing, and that when you do it right. And that's the one thing that Schwarzkopf learned from Vietnam. And he said it in his book, and I mean, you can just tell from the way the first Gulf War was, the Gulf War was waged, is that nothing was left to chance. Everything was planned out, and they fought a war that tried to minimize casualties, and they did.
Well, what do you think about Chapter 2 of that war?
Different leadership. And I think, I hope it doesn't become another Vietnam, but from what I've seen over there happening on a day-to-day basis, it sounds like it's becoming that. I think the troops are becoming demoralized, as we were.
Mm-hmm.
We went over there demoralized, because most of the people going over there, if they had any, awareness of public, affairs or current events, they knew they were going into a situation that was very political and very, by that time they realized it was unwinnable.
Was there conversation about that among the men?
That it was, let's put it this way, just about every single guy you saw over there wore peace signs and had FTA on their helmet. And there was a lot of dissension in the ranks.
Mm-hmm.
And again, there was a lot of racial problems in Vietnam. There were numerous incidents of, people, if you went into the wrong place, you could get beat up, and there were other instances of officers having grenades tossed in their quarters and stuff like that. I mean, there was a lot of bad things going on. And these were in the relatively safe areas. These were not in...
Was this black against white, or white against black, or both?
Black power.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, base camps, you'd be a bunch of black guys walking around together, not with any military bearing, with very long hair, and, very aggressive, and you stayed away from those guys because it was dangerous. They were, those people were, they were dangerous.
But you lived with them. You lived with a lot of them. I mean, you were encamped with a lot of them.
Yeah.
But, and you said originally, I think, that you felt the difference. You felt the tension.
Oh, there was a lot of tension.
And did it survive? I mean, throughout the whole time that you were there?
Did it what?
Was it still there during all the time?
Yeah, absolutely.
And by the time you were dissolved, or you went off to different places, it was still present?
It was always there. Yeah. I mean, that's what it was. That's what the times were like. That the Army was merely the reflection of what's going on in society.
Mm-hmm.
Only you were living in close quarters with people that were like that. And that was an unfortunate. It was a very difficult time for everybody.
Mm.
and particularly for the poor young blacks that came into the Army, because they were disenfranchised to begin with, and then they were being put into this situation where they were being asked to sacrifice for a country that had never given them anything. So, you know, in my situation, I was angry, and, you know, I had grown up with, you know, a lot of advantage. So I can imagine that these people were even angrier than I was. Nobody wanted to be there. And especially, I remember receiving letters from friends about a month after I got to Vietnam, describing Woodstock, their experiences at Woodstock. And here I am.
Here you are.
You know, I mean, that's what was going on. There was a real dichotomy, and there was a lot. It was a socioeconomic. There were not that many college graduates that were down at the infantry level. There just weren't that many. Most of the people that were in the infantry were, you know, poor white rural or black urban, you know, a lot of urban blacks, you know, people who were, you know, more or less had, you know, came from part of society that didn't have a lot of advantage. And, you know.
Well, Louis, I thank you very much for reliving this. I know it was hard for you.
It was, Rita, to be honest with you, it was, yeah, I don't mind doing this once in a while.
A little bit cathartic?
I don't think so much that, but, you know, it kind of refocuses your thinking and kind of gets you refocused on what's important. You know. But, all in all, having survived it, I think it probably did me more good than harm.
Good.
I mean,
Glad to hear that.
I was able to contribute something
And you did.
to society.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you so very much.
Oh, you're welcome.